Read Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 10, Deep Dive, Passwords. Now, passwords are connected to just about everything, so to really get into passwords touches a lot of things. And so I'm going to try to focus this, keep this focused just on passwords, how passwords work, and how we can secure passwords. Basically, just try to keep this tied around there. But there is some tie into things like AAA authentication authorization and auditing, and there are some other tie-ins to other aspects of security. But for right now, we're just going to cover passwords. So to start with passwords, the oldest registered vulnerability has been default passwords or easy to guess passwords that exist on a system. And so for those of you who haven't been in IT or don't know, when you buy a printer or buy a new piece of technology, typically now the password that is set for the administrator account on that piece of equipment or piece of technology is defaulted to something like admin or admin password or user password or root password or root 123 or root admin. There are about a dozen combinations, and you can probably find the default admin password by just searching the product that you're using and the word password, and you'll find the default password for that device. HP is ridiculously guilty of this with their printers. I can think of about a dozen different router and firewall providers that default administrative passwords, and it's really incumbent upon the person who's installing it to understand, know, and change the password to something that isn't normal or isn't standard. And first, I think I've said this before, but fuck that. If you are a provider, if you're a vendor, if you create a product, you should be securing it, or you should be selling it in the most secure configuration first. So every password needs to be unique, and that password should be tattooed somewhere on board and probably included as a firmware default. There's no fucking excuse for why anybody should have a default password. That's just is the oldest vulnerability out there. So the concept of passwords and changing them and making them not easy to guess is not new. This is something that should be pretty much second-hand nature to everyone, including vendors and providers. There are some, like Dell, when they sell a server, the password for the BIOS access, what they call iDRAC, is tattooed on the board. And anytime you factory reset the server, it resets to the password that is tattooed on the board. And there's no way to get that password except from being physically present at the server. And so that's a really great security provision. And so there are a considerable number of organizations that actually do something like this to protect everybody. But passwords are actually a heavily debated, and there's a lot of conflict around passwords, right, in the world of security. And that's because NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, has changed its stance on how passwords are supposed to be operated. And classically, it's always been the case that you should rotate your password every 30 days. And the thought behind that is that if you rotate your password every 30 days, even if somebody finds your password, it's only valid for 30 days. It's only valid for that 30-day period in which they have your current password. And that is not a bad assumption. That's not a bad idea, is to change your password and make sure that nobody knows it. That's fantastic. Always do that. The problem is that changing your password frequently, what we find is that vast majority of users, will either increment their password, meaning they're using their cat's name. So Sylvester, and then they'll add a number at the end of it. Sylvester 26, Sylvester 27, Sylvester 28. Oh, and they might throw in a special character in there, exclamation mark or at or dollar sign. And that's it. And that's all they'll do. And so if you know one password, you know all of their passwords. It's not hard to guess. There's a very limited number of passwords and limited number of guesses that you need to get into that account. The other thing that we find with people who frequently change their passwords is that they tend to write them down. I can't tell you how many times I've walked up to a desk and found passwords written on pieces of paper, and that's just not cool. That sucks, and people shouldn't do it. And so if you're doing it and you write your password on a sticky note, put it underneath your keyboard and think you're being secure, fuck you, you're not. And say that with all sincerity, because it's fucking ridiculous. You should know better. Grow up. The whole point with passwords is that they should be something that is private to you. The previous adage, the previous statement about passwords is that they should be like underwear, shared with nobody and frequently changed. And that's not necessarily true. I don't necessarily agree with that, because you shouldn't be changing it frequently. And if you're not changing and if you only change your underwear every 30 days, that's disgusting in the first place. But no, it absolutely should not be shared with anybody, but it probably should only be changed when it's useless. And by that, it becomes compromised. When it becomes a known password, when it becomes public, then it probably should be changed because it's not doing its job anymore. So maybe like a teenager, I don't know. Change your passwords as frequently as you need to. No more, no less. Change them only when they become known, because it's going to create this whole ecosystem where you have the ability to make a mistake. And I know how annoying it can be to enter a password, forget it the next day, and have to struggle through trying to get it reset. So creating passwords should be something that only needs to be done every occasionally. And if you look at all of your popular websites, you don't have to change your password every 30 days. You don't. My bank doesn't even require me to change my password every 30 days. None of my credit cards, none of my stock exchanges, none of my social media accounts. None of those require me to change it every 30 days. And so my cryptocurrency doesn't require me to change my key every 30 days. It's ridiculous. Then there's no reason for it. It only creates the opportunity for the user to make a mistake. So what can we do to help secure those passwords even more? What's the best way to go about creating a password? And so when you create a password, you should be creating a password that has a large number of characters. And so in 2023, the Hive Systems releases a report every year that uses the latest technology and analyzes passwords and how easy they are going to be to crack using the latest technology and latest publicly available technology. Some people would be like, oh, but quantum computers, blah blah blah. And no, it's the latest commonly available technology, and that's how it rates it. And so, if you look at this, and I'll put a link to this in the show notes. But if you look at this document, if you look at this image that they've created, it rates passwords by number of characters and basically password complexity. Numbers only, lowercase letters, upper and lowercase letters, numbers, uppercase, lowercase letters, numbers, uppercase and lowercase letters, and symbols. And so going from left to right, it gets more complex, and going further down the list, it gets longer, the number of characters. And so even at the strongest password or longest password that they're rating at 18 characters, would take 6 days for them to guess your password. 6 days to guess 18 numbers, 18 random numbers, which doesn't sound like, it sounds like a lot, But really, it would only take them 6 days to guess. And if your organization doesn't lock your account after so many guesses, it would really just take somebody 6 days to brute force your password and get into your organization. Now, combined with that, if it's just lowercase letters, just a combination of lowercase letters, it could take up to 481,000 years at 18 characters. But instantly, if it's less than 9 characters. Upper and lowercase letters, if it's less than 7 characters, it will be hacked instantly. In fact, if it's less than 12 characters, it'll be hacked in less than a month. And numbers, uppercase and lowercase letters, unless it has 12 characters, it'll take less than a year. Numbers, uppercase, lowercase letters, and symbols, it can, with just 11 characters, it can take up to 3 years. So that's kind of the rating that this goes. And the strongest that they've rated on here is 18 characters using a mix of numbers, uppercase, lowercase, letters, and symbols. At 18 characters using all 4 character types, that is 26 trillion years to hack, which is longer than the sun, than the heat death of the universe. So that's pretty good. So how do we go about creating a password that follows this kind of methodology and understanding? Because honestly, if you create a really complex password, but it's a bunch of random characters, it's going to be, 1, very difficult for you to use, and 2, very difficult for you to remember, which is the most important part, because you as a person need to use it. So how do we get to that 18 character mark easily? Well, just like everything in the world, there is an XKCD for that. And if you don't know what XKCD is, I suggest you go check it out. It's pretty awesome. XKCD.com. It's a webcomic. This dude is an engineer. I believe he was an engineer at NASA, maybe still is. And he just creates a bunch of nerd jokes all day, every day. It's great. But specifically, XKCD 936, it's called Password Strength. It discusses just this very topic and explains it in the best way possible. And what he has is a common substitution for the word troubadour with some numbers and symbols added in there. And what he's displaying is that it's 28 bits of entropy in there, and it could take 3 days to guess because it's only 28 bits of entropy, meaning that that's how many characters are kind of in there and how strong it is. Now, that is rated as a strong password. If you enter that password into any password strength monitor, it's going to tell you it's a very strong password. But while it's also not as strong as what it could be. Again, that's only 3, 6, 9, that's 11 characters. So it's not even the strongest amount. Now, according to the Hive's statement here, it could take 3 years to hack that password. So again, it's not a bad password. It's really not a terrible password to have, but it's not that strong, and it's not really easy to remember. So how do you create a really easy to remember password and get to that 18 character or more mark? Well, what we do is we create a passphrase, and what he describes it as, and what other people now commonly call this, is correct horse battery password. Because what he displays is that if you have a series of random words that are connected, you can create a long password that has a vastly higher entropy rate or number of bits of entropy that will take a computer much, much longer to hack. And so your passwords should be random words. And what I found the easiest to remember and the best to do is to do 3 words that are separated by a special character. And so, and they can be random words at random lengths. And so, like having bat dash table dash carpet dash fan, bat carpet table fan, and then throw a number in there, 5. Bat carpet. I've already forgotten. Bat table carpet fan 5. Bat table carpet fan 5. That is easy to remember. That is so easy to remember that just me saying it a few times probably will drive it into your skull for forever. And so that becomes very easy to remember. And that gets us to something like 32 characters long, which isn't even on the chart of password strength. That is how good that password is. It's easy for you to remember, easy for you to type in because you know words. It's so easy that you know the words. And you can even make a song about it. I don't know if you want to. I'm not going to. I'm not going to sing. I already torture you guys enough with my voice talking. You don't need to hear me sing. But the concept here is to make passwords easy for you to remember, so you don't have to write them down, so you don't have to make those mistakes as a user, and get yourself into a position where you're not sure what's going on. If you still need to change your password every 30 days, follow this method. Use 4 random words. You don't necessarily have to use words that are completely random. You can absolutely use words of things that are around you in your environment. That is absolutely 100% valid, but do not reuse the same words. Do not reuse the same password. Avoid doing that. That is the most common method. If you go and you watch hackers, a lot of them will use old passwords to get new passwords. I have one of my guys who thinks he's being really smart because he says, oh, well, I just increment all my passwords and I just memorize which one is linked to another. And okay, that's good. But if somebody figures out that you're doing that, you make it very easy for the hacker. And in a show like Mr. Robot, where Elliot, the main character, is hacking other people, one of the things he's doing is he's finding passwords out by goes the absolute fiction of him hacking into an account is him being able to feed all this into an AI and guess passwords of people based on their interests and things like that. And that is kind of bullshit. But what he does is not. He is guessing passwords based on information that he has about the person. And if a hacker has information about your current password, they can make a pretty good assumption about any passwords that you might create if they're related. So, if you have your son's name as your password and you have the year he graduated, then it becomes very easy for them to guess your next password because it's probably going to be somebody else and some other significant year or date. And it becomes very simple for them to guess. So don't do that. Don't do those things. Make random passwords. And that brings me to the next point. Of course, it's going to be difficult to remember 26, 48. I don't know. I probably have 990 separate accounts spread across different things. And I can't remember, even if I use the simple or the correct horse battery method of password creation, I'm going to forget all those passwords. There's no fucking way I'm going to be able to remember 190 passwords, even if they're simple random words. So what do? Well, have a password manager. Go get a password manager. I've covered it many times. I've said it many times. Use a password manager. Go get one. LastPass, Bitwarden, Passkey, OnePass, any of them. They are all very good at what they do. Some of them better than others. But yeah, go get yourself a password manager. Make sure that you're tracking your passwords in that password manager. The benefit of having a password manager is, 1, you don't have to remember any of the passwords. 2, it can actually generate the passwords for you. 3, it stores them in a secure location. And 4, it can actually automatically enter the passwords in for you and utilize things like passkeys to increase your password security even more. So I suggest going in and looking at all of that. Now, when you're using passwords, your accounts should also your accounts should also be linked to you, but possibly not directly attached to your email or something that is static about you. So your username should have nothing to do with you, if you can configure that at all possible. And what do I mean by this? Well, most accounts now, most places require that you use your username as your email as your username, and that can cause issues because if somebody knows your email address, then they know the first half of the combination to get into your account. So username and password being both halves of the authentication requirement. if somebody has your username, they now have both sides. They now have one side, and then all they need is the password. So your username should probably be something that isn't easily guessed about you as a person, but should be remembered by you. And your username should absolutely be something that you can easily remember. And so, you can do something like Jeopardy and do a this, then that, where you take a one word and you combine it with another word. And my favorite is Malcolm Reynolds' rap, the captain who keeps your food fresh. That is a good username. And you can do that. If you have the capacity to do that and not have your known email address, because email address gets shared out all the time, then you can prevent your account from being, that other half of your account process from being known. And in that same regard, some of these password managers can create randomized usernames and passwords or usernames for you. And they can even create randomized email addresses for you that you can then forward to your actual email address so that they get linked, but then they aren't necessarily unique. They aren't necessarily tied to you as a person. So using that combination, you can not only make sure that your password has been secured, but that your username itself has been secured. And then sort of the other aspect of logging in, and it doesn't really necessarily have to do with anything with passwords, but this is the protection scheme as a whole to try to tie everything into a knot, is using multi-factor authentication. Use multi-factor authentication. Use it. I don't give a shit if it's difficult for you to use, or if you don't like going into your phone, or you don't like the phone call or the text or whatever. Use multi-factor authentication. Security is about inconvenience, because if it's inconvenient for you, guess how fucking inconvenient it is for the hacker. And that is what you want. You want it as inconvenient as all possible for the hacker. It takes the hacker no time to try to brute force your password constantly. But if you make it difficult for them, if you put obstacles in front of them, they will get bored and go do something else, because hackers are very much lazy. They are some of the laziest people on the planet. They're so lazy they don't have actual jobs to go make them money, so they go and hack. I don't actually know that. I'm just talking shit, because why the fuck not? Fuck hackers. Anyways, the point being is that if you put an obstacle in front of a hacker, you will basically prevent them from getting in, and hopefully you present enough of a challenge that they go and do something else. So adding multi-factor authentication is that other obstacle. Using multi-factor authentication, and the most secure method is that software one-time password authentication method, where your password is synced with a keyed hash that changes the 6-digit code once every 30 seconds. Using that is the most secure one-time password that we currently have. That is the most secure multi-factor authentication that we currently have. There are other things that can do that, like pushes and not, but those aren't necessarily as secure. We can go into why in a later deep dive. But for this one, just know multi-factor authentication, you must enable it. And don't give a shit how inconvenient it is for you or the people that work underneath you or that are affected by the configuration. Enable it, and tell anybody who doesn't want it that they hate security and they just want to give away the farm. I don't know. You tell them whatever you want, but I tell them that they suck if they want multi-factor authentication removed. There are compensating and mitigations that you can use for instead of multi-factor authentication. So another multi-factor authentication, another factor of authentication could be something like something you have, which if you're logging in from a trusted computer, you have the trusted computer. And so you can circumvent the whole multi-factor authentication requirement, quote unquote, because then the user isn't required to do anything. They just have to log in from a trusted source. And if you can configure it that way, you can really start short circuit a lot of those issues that people have with multi-factor authentication. I get up in arms about it because I have quite a few customers who refuse to do multi-factor authentication because it's hard, because it's inconvenient. And it's just, bitch, I gotta tell you, I don't care if it's inconvenient. I'm gonna secure your ass no matter what. But all that being said, passwords, make sure they're strong. Don't write them down. If I find that you've written down a password, I'm gonna slap you. If I find that you've hidden passwords underneath your keyboard, that's a bad thing. If you are like my father-in-law and you decide that having a spreadsheet in your office where they're all written down on a pad is a good idea, then I'm going to call you out on it because that's bad. That's not good. Don't write your passwords down. I know you think it's secure because you're the only person that's in your home and that somebody would have to break into your house to get it. But if you've got a crackhead who can access the dark market and they get a hold of that spreadsheet, then they can go, hey, I got this guy. He makes a lot of money. I know it. I'm going to sell his passwords. And he sells your scanned version of your spreadsheet for $5 and compromises all of your accounts. You would feel really fucking dumb, wouldn't you? Outsmarted by a crackhead. But anyway, that is all I have for this show. Again, I'm going to create links in the show notes for all of my sources.